The transition from fiction to reality is a journey into the darkest corridors of human history and the deepest abysses of the literary mind. While the universe of the 31st millennium presents Conrad Curze as a singular anomaly of terror, he is in truth a composite shadow, a synthesis of the very real anxieties, philosophies, and historical atrocities that have defined the human condition for centuries. To understand the Night Hunter is not merely to study a primarch, but to recognize the recurring patterns of the human psyche that have haunted our own world long before the first word of Warhammer 40,000 was ever written. Curze serves as our modern vessel to explore how humanity has historically rationalized the use of fear, how we have struggled with the burden of prophecy, and how we have explored the collapse of the soul when removed from the constraints of civilization. At the core of this exploration lies the seminal work of Joseph Conrad, whose 1899 novella Heart of Darkness provides the most profound psychological anchor for this descent. Conrad and Curze are clear homages. The connection is deeper than mere nomenclature. In our world, Conrad's writing exposed the fragile veneer of civilization, suggesting that morality is a luxury of the safe and the comfortable. By using the Night Hunter as a lens, we can look back at the actual explorers, colonizers, and soldiers of the 19th and 20th centuries who, when placed in the dark places of the earth, found that their internal moral compasses shattered. Curze becomes a personification of the Kurtz archetype, a warning of what happens to the human spirit when it abandons the civilized lie and embraces a primal absolute reality. Beyond literature, we find the chilling footprints of Curze in the historical records of the 15th century Balkans. The figure of Vlad III, the voivode of Wallachia, offers a terrifying real-world case study in the philosophy of the impaler. Vlad did not use cruelty for the sake of cruelty alone, he used it as a tool of statecraft, much like the Night Hunter on Nostromo. Through Curze, we can analyze the historical effectiveness and the ultimate moral failure of total deterrence. We see how Vlad's real-world Forest of the Impaled serves as the historical progenitor for Curze's flayed streets, raising the timeless question that has plagued political science. Can a peace built on terror ever truly endure? Or does it simply sow the seeds of its own violent collapse? Finally, we turn to the ancient world to find the roots of the fatalism that destroyed Curze's mind. In the myths of the Greek oracle and the tragic figures of the Iliad, we find the origin of the prison of fate. By looking through Curze's eyes, we can better understand the ancient human struggle with determinism. Was he a slave to his visions, or did he, like so many other historical figures, use inevitability as an excuse to abdicate his own moral responsibility? Today, we use the legend of the Night Hunter as a gateway into the real-world archives of literature, history, and myth, seeking to understand the inspirations that make this character so uncomfortably resonant. We are not just looking at monsters in a story. We are looking at the mirror of our own history, reflected in the dark armor of the 8th Legion. The Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad and the Fragility of the Soul. To understand why the figure of the Night Haunter resonates so deeply, we must look to the 1899 masterpiece of Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. In our world, this novella serves as a psychological autopsy of the Western mind, exploring the thin, brittle line between civilization and savagery. Through the character of Colonel Curze, Joseph Conrad introduced a terrifying thesis: that morality is not an inherent trait of the human soul, but a social construct maintained only by the presence of neighbors, laws, and light. When these are removed, the civilized man does not merely struggle, he collapses into a primal state where power and terror are the only remaining truths. When we use the Night Haunter as a reference point for this literary classic, we see a manifestation of Conrad's greatest fear. In the novella, the protagonist, Marlowe, discovers that Curze, originally a man of empathy and progress, has abandoned his mission to become a godlike tyrant over the indigenous people of the Congo, decorating his station with the severed heads of rebels. This is the real-world origin of the flayed gardens of Nostrum. The inspiration here isn't just about gore, it's about the philosophy of the abyss. Conrad was writing during a time of extreme colonial expansion, and he used Curze to show how the enlightened European mind could justify any atrocity once it convinced itself that it was the only source of order in a dark world. Curze allows us to re-examine the historical impact of this book on our understanding of the human psyche. The literary Curze is a man who had stepped over the edge, much like the primarch who decided that the only way to save a world was to murder its soul. In real-world psychological terms, this mirrors the Lucifer effect. The idea that good people can be transformed into agents of evil by the systems and environments they inhabit. By looking back from the 31st millennium to the late 19th century, we see that the horror of the Night Haunter is actually a commentary on the banality of evil found in our own history. Furthermore, the horror that the dying Curze whispered about in Conrad's book is the same horror that defines the 8th Legion. It is the realization that once you use the tools of the monster to fight the monster, you have not won. You have simply expanded the borders of the abyss. This literary connection forces us to ask an uncomfortable question about our own world. Is our morality a choice we make every day? Or is it merely a costume we wear because we are afraid of the police? Through the lens of the Night Haunter, the classic literature of Joseph Conrad becomes more than just a school assignment. It becomes a terrifying mirror of the potential for darkness within every human heart that believes it is righteous. The Architect of the Impaled, History's Bloody Blueprint for Order. When we move from the world of fiction into the actual history of humanity, we see that the methods of the Night Haunter are not products of fantasy, but echoes of a brutal political philosophy practiced for centuries. The most obvious historical reference is Vlad III of Wallachia, better known as Vlad the Impaler. By using Curze as a modern reference point, we can deconstruct the historical myth of Vlad and examine the terrifying rationale behind his cruelty. Vlad lived in an era defined by constant betrayal, Ottoman invasions, and internal lawlessness. His answer was not diplomacy, but what he termed aesthetic terror. The parallel to Nostromo is striking when we look at Vlad's most infamous act, the Forest of the Impaled. When the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II approached Vlad's capital, he was met by 20,000 impaled bodies. A sight so grotesque that the invading army turned back in pure revulsion. This is exactly the same logic Curze employs. The idea that one massive visual atrocity can save thousands of lives by crushing the enemy's will to fight. Through Curze, we can analyze how historical leaders have justified the unforgivable as a form of perverse humanism. They claim that by being monsters today, they secured peace for tomorrow. But this is about more than just one Romanian prince. It draws threads to the ancient Chinese philosophy of legalism, which emerged during the Warring States period. Legalists such as Han Fei argued that humans are fundamentally selfish and can only be governed through inevitable and draconian punishments. To punish severely for light offenses was their mantra. Because if people are too afraid to commit minor crimes, they will never dare to commit major ones. Curze is the ultimate embodiment of this philosophy. By studying him, we can see the historical dangers of a legal system that removes mercy from the equation. However, history shows us that this form of order is always destined to collapse. Just as Nostromo sank back into criminality as soon as Curze left the planet, Vlad's realm and the Qin dynasty fell apart after their deaths. Fear is not a foundation, it is a drug. One requires ever-increasing doses to maintain the effect, until the system implodes under the weight of its own hatred. By using the darkness of the 31st millennium as a gateway, we see a warning that has repeated throughout our history. He who builds a society on fear does not build a civilization. He merely builds a waiting room for the next bloodbath. The architecture of the inevitable. As we close this investigation, it becomes clear that Conrad Curze is not merely a character in a grimdark fantasy. He is a psychological autopsy of humanity's oldest struggle, the battle between destiny and choice. By using the Night Haunter as our reference point, we can finally grasp the true weight of the ancient Cassandra complex. In our own myths, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, but cursed never to be believed. In Curze, we see a modern subversion of this. He wasn't cursed by others' disbelief, but by his own absolute conviction. He represents the real-world danger of fatalism, the philosophical trap of believing that the future is written in stone, which in turn provides a convenient excuse to commit atrocities today. Through Curze, we can look back at the figures of our history and literature, from the broken men in the heart of the Congo to the iron-fisted tyrants of the Balkans, and ask the definitive question: did they act out of necessity, or did they simply lack the moral courage to find another way? We often look at the monsters of our past and claim they were men of their time, trapped by circumstance. But the myth of Curze challenges this. It forces us to realize that the inevitability of violence is often a lie we tell ourselves to justify our own darkest impulses. For fans of Warhammer 40,000, the inspiration for the 8th Legion isn't just found in a collection of cool aesthetics or horror tropes. It is found in the darkest archives of the human experience. It is found in Joseph Conrad's warning about the fragility of the soul, in the blood-stained legacies of historical legalism, and in the ancient Greek tragedies that warned us about the prison of the mind. Conrad Curze died claiming he was vindicated because he was killed by the very system he predicted would destroy him. But in the real world, we know better. We know that the darkness he saw was not a destiny, but a mirror. As we step back from the shadows of Nostromo and return to our own history, we are left with the chilling realization that we don't need a primarch to create a nightmare. We have been doing it to ourselves for thousands of years. Thank you very much for listening.